I'm Chris Lee of the 14. Blake Lovell joins me today as we will talk about one of the major happenings in college sports this week. Blake, the ACC, the Pac 12, and the Big Ten have created an alliance, and already it's paid dividends. LSU and USC have scheduled a game to open the 24 season,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I can remember back when we were having the conversation about what exactly, when the SEC added Texas and Oklahoma, and we were trying to figure out exactly what the landscape would look like after that. I know we had mentioned the, potential rumors about the SEC and ACC coming together. Well, obviously that's not happening now because the ACC is with the Big Ten and the Pac-12. So it's interesting. I mean, we said it when the SEC thing happened with Texas and Oklahoma, everything was going to change, and I think this is just the next step in that direction of everything changing. Anything that has looked like it's looked for years now is not going to look the same once all of this comes into effect. It's going to be a completely different landscape, and we'll see if that's for the better for fans or not. I think certainly you'll get a lot more intriguing matchups, which we talked about, with the just in the SEC standpoint of adding Texas and Oklahoma. But I assume if you're an ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12, there are a lot of interesting potential games in there each season that you can look forward to. So a lot of money involved in all of this, as we know, and that's going to be the driving force of it, whether anyone wants to admit it or not.
Obviously, my opening remark was a joke. The point of the alliance was supposed to be, well, frankly, it didn't tell us much, right? But the takeaway that I think most people had from that announcement was it was going to create some kind of a scheduling partnership or alliance. We don't know exactly what that means, Light. I think there was a hint from one of the commissioners about maybe reducing the games within the league to play more out of the league. I don't know. That's the way I interpreted it in looking at it. I don't know why you do that at this point, frankly. But anyway, I think that to me, this read like just a scramble to do something like, okay, we're mad at the SEC, so we're going to make a point, and here you go. We're gonna shake our fists at the SEC, and that's that. And my goodness, you'll be scared.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reactionary move. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I just look, and like we said, I think we knew something like this was going to happen. We just didn't know who the parties involved were going to be, but it is. I mean, it's a oh my goodness, there's probably a certain group that's like probably reacting in the sense of oh no, we have to do something now, and there's also another group that's probably reacting and saying, well, here's our opportunity. Like you look at it in a optimistic and pessimistic way, I guess, probably on both sides. I would think in terms of how this came together. But yeah, it's like I said, it's going to change a lot, and I think that's where the interesting thing is going to come in. It's just how much this changes everything, and as the commissioners from these three conferences in particular put it, what was it? I think the words they used were turmoil and stuff like that, and it's a fascinating way to look at it. I think from a from a commissioner standpoint, but it was this is a direct reaction to what happened with the SEC. Otherwise, we're not talking about any of this. None of this is happening, but I think it's all the unknowns and the uncertainty surrounding what this is going to actually mean. Once Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC in 2025, or perhaps it's earlier than that. So I think it was something where these three conferences got together and said, we have to do something now. We can't really afford to wait because what happens in that scenario is, this conference goes off over to this side, this one goes to the other side, and you don't want to be the Big 12 that's left out basically with nowhere to go. And I think that's what these three conferences probably looked at it as. They didn't want to be the next Big 12 essentially or anything like that. They didn't want to just be sitting back and having to now react to something that they no longer have any control over. So I think that was a big part of it.
Blake, you recall, has the Big Ten taken teams from any other leagues in recent memory?
I think they have. I want to say they've added a few teams in
Maybe
there
Nebraska,
from from another certain conference
perhaps Maryland.
that is yeah.
What about the Pac-12? Is the Pac-12 rated any other leagues that you
Well,
recall?
there's another one you can add to the list. So, yeah, that's a good point.
What league were Virginia Tech and Miami in at one
That
point? Do you
is
remember that?
that is a good point. That is a very good point.
Well,
So,
the point is that added to the comedy of all this for me. Like, are you going to tell me that if any of those three leagues got offered Texas and Oklahoma on a platter, which from what I have been told, that's what happened. The leagues or the schools approached the SEC. I mean, what were they supposed to do, Blake?
well, that, again, like you said, it's hypocrisy when you just look at the whole thing. I mean, it's that's what I just mentioned, like the wording and everything of just how this has created instability or whatever. Well, come on, like this has been going on for years now. Like this isn't a new thing. The SEC adding two teams is not. It's nothing new. Like this started what? I mean, I guess the real sort of push to where we've had regular movement, I guess, was what, probably 2011, 12, somewhere in there.
I
Um,
actually, Blake, I think it was
or no, yeah, it would have
wasn't
been
it
earlier
when
than
it
that.
was Miami and Virginia Tech to the ACC?
Yeah,
That was what around '05.
that's true. That was earlier. Yeah.
I really think that was the domino that really started all this a long time ago because this was not a big deal, say 2 decades ago. I mean, you did see leagues change, and before that, I guess it was the folding of the Southwest Conference. Although that was the thing where a lot of those schools maybe undid themselves with the constant probation and those other things and such. But yeah, look, this was not a domino that the SEC really set in place. I mean, maybe it was. I mean, I guess you can go back. It depends on where you fix your timeline, right? Because you can go back to what was it, 92, 93, whenever it was. Maybe it was 91 when the SEC added Arkansas and South Carolina, what was just a historic move at the time. So I don't know that it's fair to just say, hey, ACC, you started all this, but that's the one, like in the last 20 years, I think that was the most notable domino that maybe, I don't know if it's fair to say again, started it, but certainly that's where, in my mind, when I think about the landscape of conference expansion over the last 2 decades, to me, that was the starting point, was when the ACC made that grab.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think is and like I mean it's just sort of been yeah, it's been continuous since then in terms of seeing some of these schools flip to different conferences, and it goes back to what you mentioned. I mean, if Texas and Oklahoma are calling the Pac-12, Pac-12 is not hanging up the phone. If they're calling the Big Ten, the Big Ten's not hanging up the phone. Same with the ACC. So yeah, it's just this was always going to be the direction I think things headed in. Like we've talked about this for several years now, which I mean even more than that probably, but I think just over as the NCAA has probably gotten a bit more criticism over the years, which that has only I think picked up each and every year in terms of some of the handling of things and all that. There was always talk of conferences, trying to do things their own way and trying to I don't know if break off's the word because that's not necessarily the case here, but it is like it's just a situation where I think that it's like it's power, like it's all about power, it's all about money, like that's it, like that's what all this is. It's we can say all the nice words and word it in a way that sounds good to people and makes it seem like this is just very wholesome type thing, but it's about being at the top. It's like about being the top dog, and that's what I think it comes down to. Is if you're going to get these opportunities, like you said, if the SEC gets a call from Texas and Oklahoma, they're not going to turn that call down because it adds to the brand, it adds to all this stuff, and at the end of the day, like all these conferences, they are competing to have the most money and to be the best, and that's just kind of what it comes down to, in my opinion.
The biggest surprise to me now that we are a month removed from this, Blake, it's that the next domino to fall was this vague alliance that happened before we saw an alliance with, say, the ACC and the SEC, which I would say 3 weeks ago is what we both thought would happen based on what we were hearing. Obviously, that went a different direction. Then you look and you say, well, I would have thought that something would have happened with the Big 12, that maybe Kansas, based on its basketball, maybe that silly would have landed somewhere, or Texas Tech. I mean, I just thought that there would have been some clarity. Either the Big 12 would have firmed itself up with some other schools. Although I say firmed up, the landscape of schools to pick from, considering what it lost. I mean, it's a massive drop off in whoever they would replace Oklahoma and Texas with. But I guess you got to try something, right? I just thought that either the conference would have dissolved in a more public way by now, or the Big 12 would have done something to at least try to add a couple other schools. To me, that's the big surprise, is that I don't know that we have any better idea a month down the road of what happens next with the schools in the current Big 12.
Well, and perhaps that's why the Big 12 is in the situation it's in. Is because maybe slow to move and slow to react, and yeah, it's. I mean, that's one of the things we talked about, like you mentioned a month ago, where I mean, who knows? Like we at the time, not thinking that this potential alliance could form with these three, but we were talking about some of those teams certainly factoring into some of those conferences in particular. How would that look? But yeah, now it's like if you're the Big 12, like your options are running out in terms of what's next, and so yeah, I'm fascinated to see kind of what any if any moves are made because as it stands right now, we know like it's they're the one that's just sort of sitting back and they're having to watch all this now apparently play out in front of their eyes, even though they don't. Like they can make their own moves, but maybe they just haven't been able to do anything to counter what what the SEC's done by adding two of their biggest acquisitions, and then what these other three conferences have done. So yeah, it's an interesting spot to be in if you're the Big 12, and I'm certainly not an enviable one.